How are you guys doing today? My name is Andy Montalvo. I'm a real estate agent here in Houston, Texas with Martha Turner Sotheby's International. And today I wanted to have a quick discussion on a topic that was brought up in the comments in a past video I did, and it was on flood zones. The person who submitted the comment, they wanted to know a little bit more about flood zones, how to go about them in Houston, and how to best educate themselves about them. So let's get right to it. Now, if you're in the market to buy a house, check this video out. It's going to give you a rundown of what it's like to buy a house in 2021. But anyways, back to the topic of flood zones. So one of the best resources you can use when finding out information about flood zones is to go to the FEMA website. And we're going to go on here right now. I want to show you guys what it's like to kind of navigate the web into getting into the FEMA flood maps, just in case you want to look at them for yourself. So you would go here to floods and maps. Then you'd go over National Flood Hazard. You can go to FEMA Map Service Center. It's going to open up another tab. And then here you can look up the address of a specific area or a specific place that you're looking for and seeing what kind of floodplain or flood area they sit on. And it will give you this sort of image. And here you can see what kind of flood zones it sits in. So a very important document that you as a buyer need to know of and look at whenever you're buying a house is the seller's disclosure. Now, the seller's disclosure is going to outline a lot of things about the house that the seller knows, and including that is going to be what floodplain is in and if there's been any flooding in the house. So in order to show you what a seller's disclosure looks like, I'm going to go to the TREC website. I'm going to type in TREC, T-R-E-C, and I'm going to type in seller's disclosure. And always go to the first one, the one with TREC. trec.texas.gov. Download the form. And this seller's disclosure is going to tell you a lot about what the seller knows of the house. But the most important part right now that we're speaking of is going to be number 6, section number 6, and it's going to talk all about the flood zones. And if there's been any flood insurance on the house, if there's been any flooding in the house or any water penetration in the house. It's also going to kind of outline what some of these floodplains mean and what some of these different flood zones mean on the FEMA maps and the maps that you look at online. So it's a really good resource to use to find out the flooding history of a house that you are thinking about buying. Now, the very next topic that comes with flood zones is, what about flood insurance? Do I need it? How much does it cost? Those sorts of questions. So to start with, flood insurance is not usually included in your typical home insurance. So it is something that you have to add on top of your regular home insurance plan. It's not always required to have flood insurance, but typically if the structure sits on a 100-year floodplain, your mortgage lender is going to require you to have flood insurance on that property. However, even though flood insurance is not required if you don't sit on a floodplain or if you sit on like a 500-year floodplain, I always recommend people to just go ahead and get flood insurance. The cost is going to be very small compared to the peace of mind that you can have, because here in Houston, you never know where it's going to flood. For example, there were a lot of people who didn't think that their houses were ever going to flood before Harvey, and then Harvey happened, and unfortunately they did flood, and they didn't have the right coverage. Now, you never want to be in that kind of situation, so I always recommend to just go ahead and get the flood insurance. Now, that brings us to the next topic. How much does flood insurance cost? Flood insurance does vary depending on if you live in a high-risk area or a low-risk area. But to give you an example, the average annual $100,000 policy is about $400 a year for a moderate to high-risk area. Plus, if you live in a low-risk area, flood insurance providers usually have programs that could probably get your insurance down to like $130 a year. Now, I know that we talked about the FEMA flood zones and showed you guys the map, but another tool I wanted to share with you guys is the Harris County flood tool. Now, the Harris County flood tool also shows you flood areas, and I just find it a little more clear as to where the flood zones sit in comparison to where the FEMA map does. Now, I feel like sometimes the FEMA map can get a little confusing because sometimes it shows you a little too much detail and too many types of flood zones. So the Houston map is a great tool to use whenever finding out about the flood zones. So as you can see, you can zoom in and you can look at the mapped floodplains. You can have floodway, a 1% 100-year floodplain, a 0.2% 500-year floodplain, and a 1% 100-year coastal floodplain. You have the boundaries, and you can just kind of go around, look at the areas in Houston, see what areas flooded, see what areas don't flood. You can look it up by address as well. Up here, you can look up addresses, and you can see specific areas if you want. But this is another great tool to use whenever finding out about the flood zones in Houston. I find it very helpful. Now, all these sites I'm showing you, I'm going to put all the links down below so you can access them as well. Now, if you're a seller, remember we talked about that seller's disclosure, so don't forget about that seller's disclosure. And if you're a seller and you don't know what that seller's disclosure is, check this video out. It's going to kind of give you an outline of the things you need to know before selling your house. And that is all I have for you on the topic of flood zones. As always, if you have more questions, just put them down below. I will get them answered for you. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.